Welcome, fellow learners. Today we're going to talk about CSS animations, transitions, and transforms triggered with JavaScript. So animations, transforms, and transitions, just a little information about them. Animations are gradual changes from one style to another. Transitions are gradual changes of property values. Transforms are changes to size, shape, and position of objects. They're frequently used in concert to apply various effects in combination to make things look really cool together. So basics of animation, there's animated DOM objects must reside within a container object. The container should be styled with position relative, and the animated object should be styled with position absolute. JavaScript animations are created by making gradual changes to the CSS of an object, and there's a timer function that initiates these changes. This timer comes from the setInterval method of the window object. So here's just the basic animation format. What you'll do is you'll have your function that will create an interval. We'll create this set interval, and that will execute your function frame, and you'll have a conditional to check to see when you should clear your frame, or your ID, I mean you should clear your set interval. Otherwise you'll continue executing and you'll do all your action here. The 5 here is the amount of time it takes in milliseconds between each action, or between each call to frame. So the set interval function, as I said, is a member of the window or is a method of the window object, and it continues execution until the interval is cleared or the window is closed. Parameters for the set interval function are function are the function to be executed, milliseconds, the amount of time between executions in milliseconds. 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. And then optionally, you can add additional parameters to the call. These will then be passed to the executing function. That is the function here. Transitions are a way of specifying how changes to CSS properties will be enacted. So transitions are triggered by events. Because of this, Louis Lazare said or showed how transitions can be triggered through JavaScript in an article from September 2011. He showed that by programmatically adding a class to an object, a transition can be triggered. So transition properties, there's the shorthand property called transition, which is used to set all 4 transition properties in a single property. There's the transition delay property, which specifies the delay in seconds for the transition effect. There's the transition duration, which specifies how many seconds or milliseconds the transition effect takes to complete. There's the transition property, which specifies the name of the CSS property or transition effect is for. And then there's the transition timing function, which specifies the speed curve of the transition effect, whether it's fast at the start, slows down in the middle, and fast at the end, or what have you. There's a few presets, and then there's also, you can create your own function. Transforms are not inherently animated. Transforms alter how elements are displayed. In conjunction with transitions and animations, transforms are powerful visual effects. 2D transform methods. So there are a number of 2D transform methods. They include translate, which moves an element along the X and Y axis. You can also specify translate X or translate Y, which only moves across the one axis, so you don't have to worry about both variables, both parameters. There's rotate, which rotates in 2 dimensions an element, the specified angle. There's scale, which can either be scale X, scale Y, or scale with the parameters X and Y. This changes an element's width and height. So scale X is just the width and scale Y is just the height. And then there's skew, and then that takes X angle and Y angle, or if you want to do skew X, skew Y, you can take just an angle. And that will skew an element along the X and Y axis. And there's also matrix, which takes 6 values. I'm not 100% sure what all those do, or what all that means, but that's something we can get into at another time. There's the 3D transform methods. There's also a matrix 3D, which takes a 16 value set of parameters. So there's 16 parameters in there. They're all numerical parameters that are used to specify the transformation. There's translate 3D, which takes X, Y, and Z, which translates along the X, Y, and Z axis. And then there's scale 3D, which is again X, Y, and Z axis. And then there's rotate 3D, which again uses the X, Y, and Z angle, or X, Y, and Z axis and the angle, and it will rotate it. And then there's perspective, which defines a perspective view for a 3D transformed element. The perspective is an interesting one. And again, translate, scale, and rotate, you can do the specific X, Y, or Z axis and specify just that one parameter instead of worrying about all three. And I used my information came from W3 Schools and also from impressivewebs.com, CSS3 transitions, JavaScript. That's where I found out about the using JavaScript to trigger a transition. So now to my example. Oops. So I created this example page. I'll go ahead and explain a little about it. So this is just a little example page again, doing more with the board games I like to play. And this is showing information about one of the board games I play. And HTML is really basically simple. I've got an XML call to load the data from the server, and then I've got some areas where I will plug in information. The JavaScript file, I'm not going to worry about going over it. I mean, if you scroll up to the top, I've got my JSON transition, my JSON stuff. I'm pulling it from the server, loading it into local storage. We've gone over this kind of stuff before. Then come down here, I've also got this display. So when I load it into local storage, I also display it. And so what this does is it loads all the pictures. So I'll go ahead and just reload this page real quick so you can see. Load, and it populates, pulls up all the pictures and drops them all down in there. And it assigns the picture, it assigns it to the class thumbnail, gives it an idea of the character number, just a counter. And then it also applies a few functions, a few events calls to it. I've got display character object, which again, this is just displays this information up top. Nothing fancy about that, just displays it. When we start to get to the fancy stuff is we've got these two functions right here, mouse focus and mouse lost focus. And what these do is on, I've got up here on our images, we've got on mouse enter and on mouse leave, we've got our mouse focus and mouse lost focus calls. What it's doing is it's taking that element and it's adding image expand class to that element. So we come over here to our CSS list here. Our image expand does a transform, scales it 1.5, both directions, both X and Y. So as we see, we come over here, we mouse over it, it scales it, zooms it in, makes it bigger. Now, I was not able to get the opacity to function properly with the adding the image expand. I tried, was struggling, couldn't figure it out. I got it working in some trial script through W3 Schools, but wasn't able to get it working on my page. So I went ahead and added in just a thumbnail hover, changes the opacity from half to full. And we've got transform character. So this is the other, the more meaty part, what I did here. So the transform character, what it does is it happens on click. So when we mouse over one of these, we click on it and it will enact this code. What it does is it gets the ID of the attribute of the element. It will do the JSON parse of the session storage of that item. So what it'll do is it'll look up that ID in session storage, and it will parse the values that are stored as the value for that ID in session storage into an object. And what it's going to do is it's going to get the character details HTML element up here, character details, and it's going to set a rotation into rotation variable to 0, and we're going to call our interval window method right here. Our call is frame as the function. Then we're doing it in 3 milliseconds. And what we're doing down here is, if we see, we've got rotation. So until rotation, or if rotation is 90, we'll clear the interval, and then we'll display the character object. And then we'll set another interval function, frame 2, again at 3 milliseconds. And frame 2 is going until rotation is 0, and then we'll clear it. And what we're doing is, if we make it through, we can make it to 90, rotation is 0. So what we're now doing is, now we're decrementing rotation. So initially, rotation 0, we get into here, rotation does not equal 90, so it's going to jump down to here. So it's going to increment rotation, and it's going to apply the style.transform. We're going to rotate x, rotation. So we're going to rotate it that many degrees on the x-axis. And we'll keep doing that until we get to 90 degrees. And once we get to 90 degrees, it's going to clear the interval. It's going to display the object. So it's going to call our display character up here. It's going to update this data here. And then we will do another animation transform here. And it will go in the opposite direction. It will start decrementing rotation, and we'll apply that as the rotation of the transform. As we can see, when we come over here and click on one, like click on Serena, the Orc Paladin, what it does is it shrinks it down and then rotates it down, then rotates it back up as the new character that we selected. And it's a pretty cool page. The one other cool thing that I did on this that I like is that the CSS here, I went ahead and used, where was it? Flex container. I went ahead and used flex container for here. So as we'll see, I'll go ahead and expand the window here, and you can see it adjusts how the images show up. We go ahead and go full screen, expands it all the way out and fills it all as full as it'll fill, but keeps it so that it only fills what screen space is available. And you can see there's a lot of characters for this game. And there's a lot, and we can scroll down, we can look at any of them, we can see the details about that character, see what kind of race and class they are. It's a pretty cool little page. And I'll go ahead and share my GitHub repo and the file for accessing this page, so you can see and look at it, see how it works, to be able to see how a little bit of how transitions and transforms work with CSS and triggering it with JavaScript. Thank you for your time.